Alright people, buckle up, this might be a long video. So, a couple of days ago, I see a short on my feed from Matt Walsh. Now, let me say, I'm not exactly a fan of Matt Walsh. Something about him rubs me the wrong way. He has this 80s televangelist kind of a thing going about him. Very much a son of a preacher kind of a vibe. But apparently he slammed that, what's his name, Dylan something or other, and their, how can I say this politely, their chromosonian LARP, if I can use that phrase in a rather blunt way. And some center-right content creators took issue with it because he was apparently being too mean. And I'm facepalming to myself watching this thinking, really? Mean? What he said was not mean, it was direct, it was blunt. And please spare me this bullshit of, oh, it won't win people over to our side. Listen here, poopsikins. I don't know if you lot have noticed this, but society is fed up with leftism. The whole reason for their advance this far is because of your limp-wristed, libertarian live and let live kind of an attitude, which does not work in the real world. The Matt Walshes of the world are a direct response to your weakness, and believe me, there are plenty of people, particularly in the silent majority, who happen to like his middle finger style of rhetoric. Here is something that the vast majority of society seems to have misunderstood for a very long time. Freedom is not a bedrock foundation that the West is built upon. No. Our freedoms are the result of the philosophical evolutionary process that's been allowed to occur thanks to the structures and social orders our societies are built on. And like I said before, freedom can go from medicine to poison in excess dosage, and now it's so heavy a poison it's trying to crack the foundations. And people take notice of this, mind you. Because the reality of the situation is this: you can't let people do whatever they want all the time. Society will collapse under the weight of its own decadent stupidity. You need a social regulating mechanism. My preferred method would be shame. And if your society does not have one and things go haywire, people will go towards the one thing in society they think will correct it: the state. See, the healthy mix is a combination of freedom yet good order. Either of these two things, taken to the extremes, you'll end up with either chaos on the one hand or oppression on the other. So your options are either aggressive social commentary or aggressive state intervention. And if you favor the former over the latter, but that still upsets your delicate sensibilities for some reason, oh boo-hoo, try growing some balls, we're gonna be here a while. See, this is why I prefer to remain in my monarchical sphere, because the mainstream right very much lacks any kind of iron or teeth. So let me explain from my point of view why the right are so friggin' useless. Starting with the inherent lack of potency in conservative cultural signaling, such as it is. You see, any civilization needs that bedrock foundation of values, cultural norms on which to build its society. Conservatism is that foundation. It is the cliff face that's obscured by the adorned structure it's holding up. And because it serves a function that doesn't move or change, it can seem kind of stale and boring when compared to any concept that does purport to facilitate a change, no matter how radically stupid, insane, or suicidal that change might be. Its lack of dynamism in a world where everything seems to change constantly, it produces this ever so slight sense of wistful melancholy at times. It's not as sexy because it's old. Which leads us further into this perspective, the misconception of the moral positioning and stances of the left versus the right. Most people seem to think that the left and right are just two sides arguing back and forth, and most people just sort of meet in the middle. This is complete bollocks. Not only are the two sides vastly different in ethic and character, their settled positions and combative strategies heavily favors the left, and here is why. The right are absolutist in nature. It's supposed to be a solid hard line because it's foundational. The left, on the other hand, are the polar opposite. They are a gradient. They're not beholden to anything because they shift the cultural winds under the guise of progress, when in reality all they value is raw power. So if one side is absolute as good and the other side is a gradient of evil, any compromise, no matter how small, no matter how minuscule, no matter how insignificant it might appear to be, will be seen as a token of your submission because they got something from you and you got nothing from them. Every little chip away at your defenses will be reforged and used to continuously bludgeon you. There is an inverse accumulation that takes place here. As your defenses not only get weaker, their increased attack power will inflict more damage over time. And as I said before, the more steps they take, the greater the breadth of boldness for potential future steps. The way the right behaves right now seems to revolve around this hopeful prayer that the weapon of the left becomes so cumbersome they knock themselves out with it. And speaking of weapons, next up, the rules of engagement. Democracy, if it does not outright create this effect, at the very least greatly accelerates it. Because democracy, by its very design, spawns factions. It is the fuel that gives rise to animus. And this is where the right shows how unbelievably stupid they really are. I find it utterly bewildering that the right can claim the only way to beat a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, or a bigger gun. Okay, so by that logic, I am going to assume you right-wingers understand then that the attacker sets the rules of engagement, not you. Here's how you can describe the left. They're essentially emaciated drug addicts trying to mug you with a plastic knife. And so much of society goes, oh, I don't want to appear, insert currently selling slandering slogan, thank you, I got that at one take. I'll give you some shekels, just enough to appease you and make you go away. While they'll come back later with a different grievance and do it all over again and accumulate power slowly by attrition. Instead of doing the base thing, which is to grab them by their wet noodle for an excuse of arrest and fling them skywards like a damn frisbee. Or at the very least, condescendingly pat them on the head and go, "Aw, that's adorable, you're laughing as an idiot," and just walk off and ignore them entirely. I asked Aiden this before, if someone attacks you with the intent to kill, as far as the action itself goes, what is the difference between their attack and your defense? The answer is nothing. Someone is going to die, either you or them. Or maybe you both do, but the end result is still the same, death or grievous bodily harm. The only difference then is the justification. If the threat is lethal, you are authorized under the code of self-preservation to use whatever means necessary. And this is what really pisses me off about the right. They have absolutely zero concept of situational awareness. The right, for some bizarre reason, believes in morality and ethics because they have principles. No, you don't. You don't have principles. You're signaling weakness. And the reason for this is because we in the West have tried to universalize that absurdly stupid idea found in the opening of the American Declaration of Independence. The right have sacrificed strength and competence, the natural aristocracy, or to appease the destined-to-fail leftist beast that is democratic equality. Yeah, that's right, I said it. Democracy is a leftist idea. You know how we know it's a leftist idea? It doesn't work. Case in point, frickin' government. Come on, treating everyone equally, all under the guise that they have something worthwhile to say or do? What a ridiculous notion. Equality is unnatural and oppressive. We are not equal, and we never will be. Are we in fight-or-flight mode as humans all the time? No. So you can understand that certain situations call for certain tactics and methodology. But for some bizarre reason that I will never understand, some on the right think, oh, what we need is just more dialogue. It is called a cultural war, not a cultural debate. You're in a battlefield. People will employ tactics best suited for their attack and conquest. They play based on their strengths and weaknesses. Your best attack is dialogue, which is their biggest weakness. So why in the holy hell do you think they would engage you on your terms? Why do you think cancel culture exists to begin with? If they could best you in a battle of wits, they would. You're essentially an expert marksman, on a hill, clear day, spooning a Barrett 50 cal with a nuclear laser scope going, why don't they engage with us? Because they'll lose, that's why. So then recognize dialogue is not a viable option, at least not for going toe-to-toe against them because they would get mauled being wrong about everything. What the right needs to do then is to stop being agreeable and completely reject every facet of modern-day social norms that's come about as a consequence of the infection of liberalism and return to tradition. That means God, country, family, man, woman, child, married household headed by a patriarch. Anything that deviates from this is make-believe fairy tale mind rot, a cancerous poison to be ruthlessly opposed with an iron fist. That means no kindness, no manners, no respect, no gender ideology, no rainbows, no pronouns, nothing. Do you understand? Good, I'm glad you're on board. Now that the aggression is out of the way, let's reassess the situation in a more whimsical manner. If one looks at the left, you will notice something rather peculiar. Everything the left stands for, everything they believe in, is an utterly dysfunctional pile of wank. The entire doctrine, top to bottom, is composed of ideas that pretty much set out to repudiate objective reality and human nature. And one might ask then, How is it then that these horribly idiotic ideas have any traction whatsoever? And the answer is rather simple, found in an article I was reading a while ago called Why Smart People Believe Stupid Things. The crux of the article was essentially this: humans have evolved in such a manner that they will rationalize irrational behavior if there is social utility found in doing so. So they will cling to something called fibs, or fashionably irrational beliefs. In our society, as we've gathered more information and become supposedly smarter, we haven't sought to remove the irrational beliefs. No. We have decided instead to become more adept at the rationalization of said stupid beliefs. And once that concept really kicks in and you look around, one very well might take a gander at the supposedly silly things our ancestors believed in and realize we still follow that exact same system of social capital accumulation. We are no different than our ancestors. The exact same monetization process still exists today. Only the currency, i.e. the beliefs, are different. And now you can recognize why we can't have a so-called rational society, because rational and objective reality can be obscured and contorted when your end goal doesn't necessarily require you to be objective or rational. Here's a confusing example. Lying is irrational. It is an objectively bad idea. However, in politics, lying is extremely useful and therefore rational. Exaggerations, which are colorful lies, mind you, has mass appeal, and so is objectively good politics. Voters are more concerned with rhetoric rather than reality, more often than not, so speaking rationally about objective reality results in objectively bad outcomes in the game of politics. And so, in this topsy-turvy world of ours where reality and the irrational can be disfigured for ill gains, can we potentially do the same for healthy gains? I believe so. So, let us take a deeper look into the players involved here, strengths and weaknesses, and potential maneuvers, because this will require capitalism, capital allocation, and strong reserve. However, and here is the kicker, played right, the opposition can and will do a sizable chunk of the heavy lifting for us, because what we are going to do is essentially emotionally manipulate a bunch of drug addicts, which I'm aware sounds amusingly nefarious. Look at the modern-day leftist. They act as a collective. They have very little will or thoughts of their own. Now, where does the left appear the strongest? Digitally, social media. I say appears the strongest because social media is the most effective mass communication mechanism, so it does an excellent job of giving off the veneer of volume and power without them actually executing any actions of their own. But always recognize social media for what it is in this context. It is a giant data bank of opinions, and that's all. Strictly speaking, it has no real value. Now, here is the funny part. Is anything that the left stands for or makes actually popular in the real world? No, it has no value, because it only appears to be stances advocated for by society's cultural elite. But there is a very obvious disconnect with the cultural elite and the real world. And you can see this with anything they try to make or pervert. It hangs like a lead anchor. It's hated by the general public because the left are not popular and their products suck. They can't make anything unique of their own, so their only recourse for any threat is an attempt to silence it or pervert it. I just realized this is an extremely elitist worldview with nothing about it that's actually elite in any way, which is rather hilarious. So look at how the left are structured in this sphere. For the most part, it's got only two components: the higher-ups, those in the media apparatus or institutions of prestige, and then the peasantry lemmings down below. And that's basically it. Or to make it even simpler than that, the signalers and the signal amplifiers. So here's what the left will do with anything that they don't like. The signalers will turn on the signal, and then the mindless lemmings will respond accordingly to amplify it. These people live to complain and make a controversy out of everything, either for monetization purposes or emotional satisfaction. They are like cult-like Puritans. And this is what sustains them. Much like drug addicts, it is what facilitates the accumulation of social capital in their little world. Now, this is something that the left does exceedingly well because it is a top-down hierarchy. They don't ask any questions, they blindly obey. Which is funny because these are the same people that advocate for the destruction of hierarchies, and yet they themselves are very much hierarchical. So what they will do is try and marshal the troops or a force based on the influential strength of the person or the company, or their perception of the seriousness of the social infringement and then dogpile them. However, there are a couple of factors about the left that makes the strategy, while effective, rather vulnerable if exploited correctly. Because they can't create anything good of their own to rival the opposition, because they can't engage in dialogue and make a good case for their ideas, because they're shit and so are the ideas, because they're emotionally or fiscally invested in all of this bollocks, it means their line of attack is very, very one-dimensional, inevitable, and so very predictable. They are a one-trick pony. And here is why I said they only have the veneer of power, because their only strategy is this one, and it's a purely conditional one at that. It only works if the target capitulates. Their only recourse for failing to kneecap the target is to further amp up the signal volume, which also conversely gets more supporters of the target to notice the signal as well. And provided the target can stay the course and stand tall, all it will end up becoming is a giant promotional poster. And because people enjoy seeing the left whine and someone willing to punch back, the defiant actors will get support. And this works, and has worked over and over again for years now. Trump's popularity, Ron DeSantis, the rise of Jordan Peterson, J.K. Rowling, Dave Chappelle specials, who've not only all survived the mob, hell, them annoying the mob is what made them more popular in the first place. So what you're aiming for with this is the visible accumulation of capital. That is a quantifiable signal of success. J.K. Rowling's Hogwarts debacle was a good example of this. And I saw a while ago, it made $850 million in 2 weeks. $850 million in 2 weeks. To put that in perspective for you, this title was earning more than $700 a second. So recognize there is a massive, massive desire among the general population who are crying, dying, hungry for content that is not tainted with this crap. So what we need then is the creation of good art and people who will not buckle to the whims of the idiots. Now, you don't need to create offensive art directly attacking anything they stand for. No. Believe me, just something that ignores their existence or ideas is enough to annoy them at this point, being the sensitive little wankers that they are. All you need to do is just stir them. No pun intended. It doesn't need to be political either. As a matter of fact, the less political it is, the better it is, because they look increasingly radical and or stupid or insane for opposing it. A very wise man once said, "Create greatness as if your enemies do not exist at all." I cannot emphasize how important that sentence really is. People hate politics, and they desperately want to get the hell away from it. So for heaven's sakes, just make a good story. Top Gun Maverick is a good example. Okay, perhaps not the best example because that's dealing with the military, but you know what I mean. The message political. Because we all know what we really want the message and the messengers of that particular message to do. Fuck off.